In 2020, the Libertarian Party presidential nominee received drastically fewer results than in 2016. It seems in our post-COVID lockdown society, Americans are firmly set in voting strictly, like we're talking about, for one or two of the major political parties. Does any third party stand a chance of making a significant go of things, such as the Brexit party prior to COVID? Or do you think the third party dream is just ultimately dead? And that's a jump ball for either one of you.
Let's I'll just go ahead and swing this one real fast, Brian. Brexit, what succeeded in that wasn't necessarily a party. And I think that's where a lot of Americans, they look at the Brexit party in the UK and they try and apply the same circumstances there to over here. Was it a populist movement like what we saw in 2016? Yes. Did you have some pretty fringe outside the political establishment candidates running when you look at Farage and others? Yeah, absolutely. But, we're dealing with a parliamentary system. We don't have that here. In our constitutional republic, in the way that our three branches work, you can't succeed with that in either the House or the Senate. So, I mean, right there, you're already dealing with a major barrier. We also have, as Jon Stewart used to call it, 50 meth labs of democracy, where, you've got Alaska, who's actually trying to get rid of ranked choice voting. You've got some northeastern states like New Hampshire, who I think have instituted it. And then you've got other states where it's one ticket voting, where you're just voting a party. We're too scattered to allow that to succeed at a federal level. So right there, I kind of throw that out. But secondly, people are, I think if somebody's going to run as a dark horse, as a third spoiler, what have you, I think often people are like, you got to have a political institution backing you. Ross Perot didn't have that. And if we're looking strictly at electoral victories, or at least successes in breaking barriers, the only person who has really done that in the last 60, 70 years, ironically, was George Wallace. George Wallace, 1968. He took the South. Johnson almost completely lost it. It was weird that we're having this former segregationist, and he's actually taking dozens of electoral college votes. Now, you had him tied with a lot of things. You were talking about forced busing and Vietnam and all this other stuff, but that was it. And he didn't require a third party at the time. He just ran as himself. The same goes for Ross Perot in 92. You had a moment there with Ralph Nader and the Green Party in 2000, but that really hasn't happened since. If it would have happened, it would have happened with Donald Trump in 2016. But given his experience dealing with Pat Buchanan in 2000, when he wanted to have his little flirtation with Ross Perot's Reform Party, which was going in all types of fabulous, very freaky directions, he knew that just wasn't going to happen. Donald Trump doesn't like to lose. Going back to our last question, he doesn't like to lose. So unless somebody's going to have that much charisma, I would say unless you're running on a single issue, you're running on the border, you're running on crime, you're running on Ukraine, what have you, you would have to be one charismatic MFer to actually pull that off.
See, I think I'm a little bit more optimistic on third party viability. It might not be this election cycle. As you said, we're coming out of too much for that to really be overcome. But at the same time, I look to COVID. I look to what's going on with the Twitter files. I look to what's going on with censorship in big government. I look to what's going on with the obfuscation of what's happening with the vaccinations. I look at what's going on, again, with the war state. I think a lot more people are seeing what's going on in that the two parties are not necessarily separating from each other in any meaningful fashion, that things are getting worse, conditions are getting worse for Americans. And I think that if you had a powerful enough message that could really win people over, and this is something that the Libertarian Party has dropped the ball on, being more in the camp of let's whine about things that actually give somebody a prescription for success, something they can believe in, kind of into that dreams and resentment concept. But if they can provide people with something that can say, we're going to try something different, something better, because what you've got right now is clearly broken. It's non-functional. We're getting poorer. We're getting stupider. Our children's education is in the garbage. And we're in a, quasi-medical fascist state currently. I think people are going to be far more open to a third party than people might give credit to. And this is backed up by several polls that have come out recently showing that people are identifying as independent more than they have ever in the history of the country. You also have people that are changing parties at a much higher rate. For example, we saw with Donald Trump, to his credit, a lot of Black Americans switch, not just men, but men and women. Same thing with Hispanics. They switch sides. You look at what's happening with education and the Asians, the clear, racism in academia against the Asian population. And they have to be looking around and going, no one's helping us with this. Who's going to stand up for educational rights? Who's going to stand up for people to actually get by on a meritocracy basis? And I think that there is a lot of opportunity next election cycle and moving on for third parties to grow if they have the right messaging and the right charismatic leader, as Remso had hinted at.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of independents, independents at least to pay attention to, I think they say more about Biden than they do about Trump. You've got Tulsi Gabbard, who's become a staunch Biden critic since leaving the Democrat Party after retiring from Congress. Currently, progressive Senator Kyrsten Sinema is a recent example of someone leaving the Democrat Party due to them becoming too left-wing, even for her, especially since Dems were able to maintain their majority in the Senate. There are other examples of state and local elected officials dropping the Democrats to go independent or even switch to Republicans. Remso, do you think the average American or the average liberal American voter will ultimately be the deciding factor in whether Biden stays in office? Or do you think they'll maybe vote for someone else or just stay home?
Man, they immediately started saying that DeSantis was worse than Trump a few months after the 2020 election. I mean, they will paint whoever. I mean, you could run Lindsey Graham if they wanted to do that. You could run Lindsey Graham. I mean, you could get him, and they will basically say that he's Satan incarnate and that the world is ending. John McCain, who liberals suddenly fell in love with, I could still pull up articles from 2007, 2008, where they're saying he will lead us to World War III. Mitt Romney, a liberal darling now, because he's a common sense Republican. I still remember them saying he's going to kill Grandma and kill Big Bird and everybody. No, I think I think that's very optimistic thinking that Democrats will not show up. But, will they switch? Maybe what Brian mentioned earlier, your suburban white liberal woman who is typically that voting bloc that people really try and push out for general elections, they're not budging.
Mm-mm.
I echo a lot of what Remso's saying there. I do think that, as I said, it's an interesting thing to watch, though. These people change parties. And I do think it has a lot to do with Biden, a lot of the situation that's going on and how he's been leading the party. I think that a lot of Democrats are going to start to see, though, the viability of their getting elected and staying in office is shifting. Education, for me, is paramount to a lot of what's going on. The budgetary process, like Manchin, he's stood up, and I think he actually may be a viable candidate to, if the Democrats were smart, to run in place of Biden. I think he makes the most sense as a guy that says, look, I've crossed over the aisle here to maintain my principles as a protector of your citizenry and your rights. I think you're going to see this become a more popular thing to do if the Biden administration continues to rule as they have, to have these gaffes. And honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if Joe Biden is removed from office before he ends his term. I think we're seeing that build up currently, by the way. So don't be surprised.
That would be amazing. While many pundits are speculating which Republicans will jump in the game to compete against Trump, the rumblings of Biden being replaced at the top of the ticket, like we're talking about, by Kamala Harris, or being contested by more moderate candidates such as Joe Manchin or someone like this, that seems to have kind of died down. But because it seems Biden fully intends to run for re-election, do you guys think this is set in stone?
I don't. I think that everything right now, and again, I work in public relations, so I'm looking at the media on a daily basis. I'm seeing how they're reacting and how they cover things very specifically. And you can see the ebbs and the flows and how the media, and it's just, of course, run by the Democratic establishment for the most part, how they cover stories. Mm-hmm. It is night and day. The way in which they covered Hunter Biden, the scandal with the laptop previously, the censorship, obviously the way in which they went after Donald Trump for these documents. The reaction lately has not been this exceptional wall of, okay, it's disinformation. You don't have the CIA and the FBI stepping up to cover for him anymore. It looks pretty clear to me that they're putting some blocks into place that they can then use as stepping stones to take down Biden, if not explicitly, by saying you're going to get impeached, you have to be removed from office, to pressure him to step down to the point where he's not going to be eligible or able to run. That's what it looks like to me is kind of being put into place here.
Yeah, I think they're definitely hedging their bets for sure. I don't know if they're going all in, because they're certainly not going after him from the same fervor they went after Trump. But Remso, what do you think?
I think I think he's pretty much got locked in, because if there was ever a time to get rid of Biden, it would have been the time when they didn't even have to have this conversation in the first place. I mean, there were young, mentally competent, physically fit people without Alzheimer's running in 2020, and voters awkwardly, like, they didn't entirely reject them and go for Biden at the beginning, because Buttigieg was, he was front of the pack until they all realized that they can't get a single app to work. It was so weird. But somehow, like, that demon monster lady from the Evil Dead, he just kind of like crawled out. I mean, he out Bernied in some of that stuff. Bernie Sanders looks outright like a genius compared to Biden, who was just like, who are you? Where am I? Listen, Jack. I mean, I don't, dude. We're dealing with somebody who was just like, this is a weekend at Bernie's. He's there. There's other people involved telling him what to do. Like, grandpa, move this way, sniff that kid, send weapons there. I think it is better for the Democratic establishment and the globalists to go ahead and keep him there than to get somebody that actually has ideas and wants to do something.
I look at Biden and I just see a guy who's in a position of power and just saying, why shouldn't I run? Why shouldn't I just stay right here? Like, what's wrong with this?
The kids love me.
Right. Exactly.
But I think that's a surefire way for him to get defeated. That's where I think I'm coming from. I'm looking at it from the perspective of the average American who voted for Biden predominantly because he was not Trump. That's why he got elected, period. Flat out. If Trump does run again, you can galvanize, and Biden will win again. If he doesn't run and if he doesn't get the nomination, I think you're going to find that most Americans have no faith in him. They can see the bumbles, they see the stumbles, and even if he's useful to the establishment, he's not going to be useful if he can't win.